G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to DCS World with Mags, and welcome aboard the Grumman F-14B Tomcat by Heatblur Simulations. I cannot begin to tell you how long I have been waiting to finally be able to make this video, and what a goddamn monster this thing actually is. But before we go too far into that, I do need to go over a couple of things with the aircraft. First, this is a pre-release build. This aircraft is still under development. It is not finished yet. If it was finished, you wouldn't be watching this video, you'd be flying the bloody thing yourself. Also, no, I do not know a release date for this aircraft. In fact, content creators in general would be the absolute last people on Earth Heatblur would ever consider telling a release date if they have one. And the last thing I sort of want to cover here. This aircraft, as I said, is in development. Not everything is complete yet. I'm going to be showing you the areas that are complete in today's video. However, this is not going to be a tutorial. I'm just going to take it out for a spin. I'm going to give you guys some telemetry. You can see what's going on with the aircraft. You'll be able to take a good look at how it's actually flying. And I'm going to try and give you some feedback about what I'm doing inside of the cockpit, or what I was doing inside of the cockpit at the time that I was flying the aircraft, at the time of the recording. And some feedback on how it actually feels to fly. So, welcome to the cockpit of the F-14, and there is a lot to talk about in here, but the first things first, you'll notice I do not have a pilot rendered in the seat. I have that disabled, but the mirrors do reflect the helmet regardless. Now, the pilot's head doesn't quite turn one-to-one with the track IR. I assume this is because of the curvature that is involved with track IR. I imagine it would match one-to-one head tracking with VR, however. And that's actually probably one of the first things to mention. The F-14's cockpit has been designed with VR in mind from the ground up, and you'll see that most prominently when we actually take a look at Jester a little bit later in this video. But first things first, panning shot of the cockpit. The F-14's cockpit is it's very analog, and I love it for that, but at the same time there is some automation going on behind the scenes. This isn't like the Mk.II where damn near every circuit in the aircraft has its own switch. The system's laid out logically, they make a lot of sense, they've got nice big switches attached to them, they're all clearly marked, and everything is in exactly the point you would think it would be. I was able to find pretty much every single system that was needed to land the F-14 for the very first time on a land-based runway without actually having to look at a manual. Everything was exactly where you would think it would be. So, taking off from the carrier, much like the F-18, throttles to 100%, however, you'll notice we're not going down the catapult. This is because there is an extra step in the F-14. You have to hit Shift U, which tells the pilot to salute the shooter, and that you're ready to go. Clear of the deck, retract gear as quickly as possible.
There is a bogey, 225, 1 mile.
Thank you very much, Jester, for the update. Retract flaps. Until the flaps are retracted, the wing sweep will not activate. And once the flaps are retracted, double check to make sure wing sweep is set to the automatic position. Now, as I said at the start of the video, I'm going to give you some telemetry on this one, so we're putting the info bar at the bottom of the screen. Pay careful attention to the speed, acceleration, altitude, AOA, and G-forces whenever this bar is on screen. I think you're going to be quite surprised with some of the numbers that pop up down there. First things first, we need to get ourselves supersonic towards the city. Now, I am flying out on the Persian Gulf map off the coast of Dubai, and we're going to be using Dubai as the backdrop. The reason is, it's really difficult to pass along a feeling of speed inside of a YouTube video. It's very easy to tell how fast you're going while you're actually flying the plane, but you sort of need a point of reference when you're actually watching a video. A city makes a fantastic point of reference. At this point we're just heading out to nav point 1, which will position me at the end of the city, and then I'm going to do one straight pass down, through and above the city just to show top speed. And what we're going to do at the completion of this run, once I've achieved, well, my plan is around, on the telemetry bar at least, or the info bar at the bottom of the screen, around 1,600 kilometers per hour in level flight at sea level, is to pull the aircraft vertical and keep it there until it runs out of energy, and show you what actually happens when you run out of speed in a stall situation. But before that, high speed handling. The F-14 does have a tendency to try and pull up constantly. It requires a little bit of a trim when the wings are fully swept and it's at supersonic speeds to counteract this tendency. Now, the F-14 in general doesn't respond particularly well to pitch forward or negative G movements on the flight stick. However, it responds incredibly well, even in this configuration, fully swept, to pitch up movements. You will be shocked at how quickly the F-14 will respond and how quickly it will turn, even in this configuration. The other thing to note is while the roll rate on the F-14 with the wings fully extended is not horrible, as the wings slowly retract into the high-speed configuration, the roll rate will increase, and fully retracted, its roll rate is like nothing else I've flown. It is incredible. But anyways, we hit our target speed and we're now pushing into the vertical. Pay special attention here to the transfer between airspeed and altitude. And now that I've got the F-14 on the line, I'm basically giving very small amounts of pitch input only in order to try and keep the F-14 as close to the line as possible. As the aircraft is slowly slowing down, it is trying to push the nose down very gently on its own, so a constant pitch up is needed to try and keep it on the money. It's also worth noting that the HUD is not quite as accurate as you might want, but I will talk about that later, because it's not an inaccuracy with the aircraft, or I should say it's not something that Heatblur have gotten wrong. The real aircraft's HUD was like that as well, but as I said, we'll come to that a little bit later. And we're about to pass 13 kilometers, 150 kilometers an hour at 13 kilometers, and we're still continuing to decelerate. We're now below 100 kilometers, 90, 80, 70, and we're going to peak at 72 kilometers an hour, airspeed at 13,387 meters before we nose over. And at this point, I am fully back on the stick trying to induce a stall. Because believe it or not, we're not actually in one at this point. This is what the aircraft's designed to do in this situation. It's nosing over, and you'll notice that there is a slight rock to left to right inside of the aircraft. Essentially, the aircraft is auto-stabilizing itself aerodynamically. Without the need of a fly-by-wire system, it's designed to do this. And it's trying to put the nose down to grab enough airspeed to stabilize itself all on its own as well. The only reason that it's not here at the moment is because I'm deliberately holding back on the stick, trying to keep the nose up to get the aircraft out of control, but as you're seeing, it just refuses to go out of control. Now, as soon as I let go of the stick and actually let the plane nose over as it's been wanting to the entire time, it immediately picks up enough speed in the dive and completely recovers itself. Again, it doesn't lose control at any point, and we're back to smooth flight. The F-14 under normal flight situations is near impossible to get into a stall situation. In fact, it's so difficult to get into a stall that NATOPS doesn't even define it as a stall unless you have pegged AOA at over 7,000 feet a minute descent rate. So, what about flat spins? Well, flat spins are generally pretty difficult to actually get the aircraft into unless you go out of your way to do something incredibly stupid, which is precisely what I'm about to do here. Deliberately tipping it over and then kicking the rudder to get the nose out past 25 degrees and backing off one of the engines just slightly for a split second to cause a small amount of asymmetrical thrust. And we have the infamous Top Gun flat spin. Although getting out of them isn't overly difficult. Much like a World War II aircraft, you run exactly the same principles. Turn into the flat spin, attempt to roll the aircraft over and get it to a nose down position, and the aircraft will accelerate out without too much of an issue. There is a couple of small provisions on this, however. If the flat spin has been induced due to a compressor stall or an engine failure, which while less common on the F-14B than it was on the F-14A, was still something that did happen, you are in a world of trouble. You will not be able to use full power on the opposing engine in order to be able to pull out because, well, it'll only make the flat spin worse. Asymmetrical thrust is something that the F-14 does not respond to well at all. The second thing to note is once the spin has gotten into the 40 to 50 degrees per second rotation rate, it might be worth just ejecting. Actually bringing the plane back at all once it's spinning at that speed is near impossible. And on the few times I've managed to trigger a spin that aggressive, I've actually found myself with the engines failing. during the spin. But having said all of that, as you can see, you have to sort of go out of your way or have something go wrong with the aircraft in order to trigger a spin like this in the first place. The rest of the time, providing you're within the normal boundaries of the flight envelope, even when you're pushing it or putting the aircraft into what should be a relatively unrealistic situation, the plane tries to save you. It's a surprisingly idiot-friendly aircraft. It almost feels like a fly-by-wire plane, but without actually having fly-by-wire. It's doing what it does based on simple design. Whenever you start approaching the edges of the optimal flight envelope, it will start buffeting and shaking. The plane will inform you in advance, without actually stopping what it's doing, that you are reaching the very edge. When you reach the edge, the plane will try and recover itself all on its own, and when you finally get to the point where you do something incredibly dumb and push the plane beyond its capabilities, barring mechanical failure or an incredibly suicidal pilot, it's still relatively easy to bring back. Alright, so we will be returning to Dubai for one more demonstration at the end of the video, but before that, welcome to sunny NTTR, where we're going to go into an air-to-air engagement, and we're going to display some of the weapon systems available to the F-14, and we're going to have a look at the Jester AI. Now, the interface control for the Jester AI is actually very intuitive. As I said at the start of the video, it is designed for people with head tracking or VR in mind, but for those that don't, simply using Control 1 through 8 will allow you to select the options on the menu. For those that do have head tracking, controlling Jester is either the A key or whichever button on the HoTaS you wish to bind. You press the button once to bring up the basic radar menu, a second time without selecting anything to bring up the configuration menu for the aircraft, and then you simply look towards whichever option you wish to activate. In this situation, I'm setting the RWR up for air-to-air interception.
Okay, there's a bogey, 125, 56 miles, Angels 6.
Thank you, Jester. You can also set the flare programs and chaff programs that you want to run.
Bandit, Bra, 125, 54 miles.
Thank you again, Jester. You can also set the flare and chaff profiles for automatic release, or you can set the flare and chaff to manual if you choose to do so. Now, configuring the weapons, first you want to turn on SW Cool to start cooling the seeker heads on the sidewinders, and missile prep to prepare the radar guided missiles. You can also select between a low and a high gun rate, and you can arm the master arm right here at the front. Now, it is worth noting, if you do close the top tab for the master arm, it will automatically disable the master arm, so make sure that is left open, and also make sure that you use the buttons on the lower right hand side control panel to select HUD mode air-to-air. Now, there are 5 buttons here. You've got takeoff, cruise, air-to-air, air-to-ground, and landing in order from top to bottom. From there, it's simply a matter of selecting which weapon you want to use on the rotator on the flight stick, which you have disable, gun, sidewinders, and radar guided missiles, which includes the AIM-7s and, of course, the AIM-54 Phoenix. The only extra thing to note here is as soon as you hit SW Cool and Missile Prep on the control panel, the missiles are ready to launch straight away. However, they will not perform correctly until they have had 60 seconds to fully prepare themselves. So be sure to activate these in advance of engaging in combat. So all in all, configuring the F-14 for combat is relatively straightforward. So we're going to start this engagement using the AIM-7 Sparrows, and then we'll move on to the AIM-9 Sidewinders. Now I'm just watching the RWR as we approach in here. Once we get a bit closer, I'll get Jester to lock up the target ahead of us.
Wilco.
There we go.
Lock. Target, 20 miles.
We now have a lock on the target. Now the HUD itself, as I'm sure you've noticed, is rather Spartan. You really rely on Jester to actually feed you target information that would traditionally be displayed on the HUD in an aircraft like, say, the F-18. This is actually going to create a very interesting dynamic when you start getting multiplayer co-op with 2 people inside of the aircraft. The person who's in the Rio position is going to have to really feed information to the pilot, because the pilot doesn't have too much in the way of information of his own.
That's a MiG-28. Okay, switching to PSTT. Target, 7 miles.
And yes, Jester did just identify the targets as MiG-28s, and you should probably pay a little attention to the RWR display as well for these 2 particular aircraft. Now the Sparrows on the F-14 have the same restrictions in regards to bore sight as with more modern fighters. However, unlike more modern fighters, the limitations of the bore sight are not displayed on the HUD.
Okay, we're on. Flash. Bandit is going down. I lost lock.
It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is just one of the quirks of the F-14.
Bogey, Mk.28, 2 o'clock, 2 miles. 1 o'clock low.
And Jester's callouts will not stop, and he feeds very, very good target information.
6 o'clock high.
So at this point I'm just opening the gap a little bit, picking up some altitude and getting some separation on the Mk.28. And then I'm going to turn back, and this second kill we're going to go for the Sidewinders. Now the Sidewinders are even easier to use. Simply select Sidewinder mode, which I already have. You can hear the growl in the background at the moment. Uncage the missile when you've got the nose towards the target, and the Sidewinder will automatically start tracking for the heat signature, and you can actually see where the tracking is on the HUD of the F-14. So you can see the pipper moving around at the moment. And we just got it there, and there we go, we've got a lock.
12 o'clock.
Fox 2.
Flash.
Boom.
The Bandit is going down.
So weapons deployment for basic Sidewinders, guns, and Sparrows is very simple with the F-14. There are a few tricks you can do with the AIM-54, but I'm still playing with those at the moment. Particularly, you can fire them in auto-acquisition mode, simply pointing them towards the target, releasing the missile, and letting the missile actually find the targets all on their own, which allows you to pull off some pretty incredible trick shots. But I will save those for another video. As for how it feels to fly combat in the F-14, honestly, it feels better than anything else that I've flown so far. While flying this machine, there is almost nothing that I can't outturn. If I can't outturn it, I can easily outrun it, and if I can't outrun it with the AIM-54s loaded on, I can generally just outrange it. But don't just take my word for that, let's head back to Dubai and do one more demonstration of the absolute turning capability of the F-14, and some of the risks associated with actually using this turn capability. Also, a special note here, as I haven't mentioned it yet, the sounds for the F-14, particularly the external sounds, are just placeholders for the moment and should be replaced by the time the F-14 is made public. Alright, so the turning capability of the F-14. First things first, for you purists out there, I have changed the information on the info bar over to Imperial this time. Alright, so I have 3 demonstrations here. First things first, we are going to go for an ultra high speed, ultra low altitude pass to show off the precision of the F-14 at high speeds and how hard it can actually turn at high speeds. So we're going to take it through Dubai and slalom a couple of buildings, and then we're going to bring the aircraft into a sustained 4.5 to around 7G turn, riding on the edge of blackout before bringing it back around to the city and putting it back through the buildings. Almost blacked out there. And back around to the city. And you can see how easy the aircraft is to control at these kind of speeds and how precise it is despite the lack of fly-by-wire, which is actually going to be important for another part of this video. Okay, so that's the high-speed, low-altitude turn. This time we're going to go for as tight a turning circle as we can actually get out of the F-14. Now, I don't get this quite perfect. I mess up the rudder inputs a little bit. The F-14 wants rudder inputs kind of like a World War II fighter. You really need to work the rudder pedals in comparison to much newer fighters. But what we're looking at here is a target area of 320 knots at 7G sustained. And you can see how tight the F-14 is actually turning here. So we're going to complete one turn. I've got the balance here, and then we're going to roll out. We're going to do another turn in the opposite direction. Now picture this in missile combat. You're doing about 350 knots, maybe 400 knots. Enemy fighter has just passed by. You want to do a 180 and bring the nose around as quickly as possible to get that Sparrow off the rail and heading towards the target. It doesn't take anywhere near as long considering the size of the aircraft and the lack of fly-by-wire systems as you would think to bring this aircraft around extremely quickly. And poor rudder input in that particular moment is actually what brought the nose up and caused me to mess up that turn. But you get the general idea. Now, there is one more thing to show you here. The F-14B, despite being a mid-1990s upgrade in terms of technology, does have some old systems from the late 1960s, early 1970s from the original Tomcat A still installed. One of those in particular is the INS, or the Inertial Navigation System, which is still analog using gyroscopes and analog sensors. And more than that, the actual G tolerance for the F-14 is only 6.5 G. Now, this was put in place to conserve the airframes. The G tolerance itself was actually designed to be higher, and pilots have taken the F-14 out as far as 12 G without sustaining any damage. However, once you go beyond 12 G, bad things start happening. And this comes back to my mention earlier on in the video about the suicidal pilot. The F-14 has no fly-by-wire to assist your ability to fly, but it also means it has no fly-by-wire to restrict or restrain your ability from doing something incredibly stupid, like the 21G full stick aft brake turn that I just pulled off. And as I'm sure you've already noticed, we have a couple of problems. First, the VDI in the center screen has gone black and the HUD ladder has disappeared. This is because that turn put enough force on the analog INS system that it is now shattered into a million pieces in the inside of the aircraft. That is modelled. You also notice the aircraft is kind of a little lopsided and not wanting to control nicely at the moment. That's because I've damaged the flight control system a little bit, and that's not the only thing that is broken in that turn. Yeah. The only reason these engines are still running is because I'm doing 640 knots at this point, and as soon as I start slowing down, they're both going to fail. They're essentially ramjets at this point. So this is the catch with the F-14. Aerodynamically, the aircraft is fully capable of performing a turn like that, but neither its structure nor its internal components are actually designed to be able to withstand those kind of G-forces. And the G-force tolerance of these components and the structure is modelled. And since there is no fly-by-wire system to stop you from pulling a massive stupid like I just did, it is entirely possible if you're not paying attention as a pilot, you've got the speed on, you see that target and you decide just brake onto its tail and get that sidewinder off the rail, that this could be the end result. So you need to keep this restriction in mind at all times, because the F-14 is quite happy to turn as hard as you want to pull on the flight stick, right up until the moment you kill yourself.
We've got a bogey, 075, 1 mile. Watch the ground.
Okay, so landing the F-14. Again, this is not a tutorial by any means, I'm just going to put it down on the deck. The F-14 is an interesting one. When landing on a land-based runway, the F-14 is incredibly easy to put down. In fact, the closest thing I've been able to compare it to is like landing a medium-sized commercial airliner in something like X-Plane 11. Once you've got the glide path, it just slides smoothly down to the runway and is very easy to put down. However, when putting down on a carrier, things are a little bit more complicated. The optimal landing speed for the F-14 is 125 to 135 knots, and it wants 15 units or around 11 degrees AOA for touchdown. So a higher AOA than the Hornet, but at a much slower speed. And without the advantages of fly-by-wire, it does tend to move around a lot. Now, putting it down on the carrier isn't necessarily difficult, but nailing that perfect landing at exactly the 3-wire with exactly the right AOA at exactly the right speed is actually quite a challenge in of itself, and something that I am still, as you can see, very much practicing. That being said, it is a hell of a lot of fun. So anyways, ladies and gents, I guess the biggest question that I was asked on a recent Reddit thread is is the F-14 as good as everybody hoped? Well, I can tell you I am not disappointed at all. In fact, I've been surprised by this module in a number of areas, and my expectations for this aircraft are already particularly high. So while I cannot speak for everybody, personally, yes, it is as good as we hoped, and yes, I do think it'll live up to the hype. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching. Remember to check the video description down below for all of my links to my social media, my Twitch, my Discord, my Patreon, and so on. And also remember to click that like button if you did, share and subscribe if you would like to see more, and as always, fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.